All right. Hello. Welcome everybody to our final career panel discussion for the summer session of Gurukool 2021. We are very excited because this is a topic that has been suggested quite a few times in the last few sessions, and we finally have it with two of my favorite people. So welcome Dolon. She's an associate consultant at Bioness Partners, and Mayur, who's also an associate consultant at Catanian. Mayur is based out of Berlin, and Dolon is based out of New York. So let's have this as an open discussion format as we have had for kind of all of our webinars in the past. So if you have any question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. If you do not want to unmute yourself, then again, do type in the question and we will take them on one by one. Okay, so first of all, welcome guys. Thank you for joining us today. I think the first thing that I want to ask you, and both of you can give your own answers about what you think about it. What is consulting and why were you interested in consulting? When did you get to know about it? And what was something that stood out for you in your job search process or when you were trying to figure out what you want to move to outside of academia? So it's a pretty broad question. So whoever, Dolan, do you want to take it on first?
Sure. I was approached by a Canadian startup on my final year during my PhD to do consulting for them. And I asked, what does consulting mean? Because it's a very generic English word for which everyone knows the meaning for it. So it can be used very broadly. And that is also like a tip that you should look out for. A lot of roles will use consulting as a keyword because it's a popular keyword, but not every consultant is the same type of consulting. That's how I came to know about it. And that was my first sort of getting my feet wet besides lab work. And I enjoyed it, although it was very, very different from, what I do right now. And then I, became part of the consulting club. I talked to other consultants, PhDs and non-PhDs. And then I did an internship at the Solution Lab to get a real feel of if I'm going to enjoy it. That's important for me. You can be a person that job is just a means to, you have to have a job to pay bills and whatnot. So you can be also that person. But for me, enjoying something I do is very, very crucial. And then what stood out for consulting is that I get closure. In academia, I wasn't a right fit because I don't get a high out of the fact that, oh, yay, I developed this assay to figure this out. That doesn't work for me. I need to see an end sort of light at the end of the tunnel and actually reach there to feel useful, if that makes sense. For consulting, whatever is the end product or deliverable, it happens in a month's time or 2 months time or 3 months time tops. And that is sort of you're jumping from one exciting topic to another exciting topic. And that's why I did a PhD. And in my PhD and postdoc, I was only reading papers related to my domain. So I wasn't really wary of everything that was going on. I have read more papers in my last 3 weeks than I have read probably in half of my postdoc, about everything and anything, like not just, one particular thing. So that really stands out. I'm actually doing I'm abreast of exciting science that's going on. That's why I did a PhD. I did not do a PhD to do an experiment for the rest of my life. So I was like, oh, it's very different, but I like it. And my internship, I enjoyed that a lot. I'm only 3 weeks in, so it's my honeymoon period. So whatever I say, take it with a pinch of salt and ask me 6 months later how I actually feel. But so far, I'm enjoying it. It's very stressful, but I'm enjoying every minute.
Wonderful. Mayur, you're way past your technically your honeymoon period, but so you can give that experience.
Yeah, just a note to what Dolon said. I completely agree with whatever she said, and I second that. And since you're 3 weeks into the job, there are very good reasons why you ended up in consulting. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy that for a much longer time. Uh, Besides that, I mean, when I came across consulting, this was back during my PhD. One of my friend gave me a book about consulting, and I actually got intrigued reading one of the cases about the efficiency of a jet plane, how much passengers it can carry depending on the plane size, etc. I did not pay so much focus on that at that moment, but gradually, as I started filtering out my options, I came back to consulting and venture capital. Those two things stuck with me because of different reasons. I mean, I was trying to understand what are the things I would like to do in long term. How quickly can I learn? Because that was important for me. Is there a possibility to rise up the ladder? That was essential for me. And so things started uh, coming together. And then, as I said, consulting and VC came together into my mind. And I started exploring that space even more. And I think I am there now for a year and 8 months almost, and really having fun.
Okay, wonderful. So my next question, and these are some things that I remember asking when I was first trying to understand what this world of consulting means. So I think my next question is going to be, what does a consultant do? So what does a day look like in the life of a consultant? And how, like you talked, Dolan talked about how, they're fast projects, and I'm sure each project has its own different timeline, but how long do these projects last? And yeah, if you could just talk more about your day.
So
Do
maybe
you
I
want to take
can
that
start.
first? Yeah.
Yeah. So what does a consultant do? Just a small sentence regarding that. Consultants normally rent out their brains. This is what they do every single day, and this is what they are paid for. This is what the company is paid for. Having said that, every project is different, every project is exciting, and they can range from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, maybe even up to a year, depending on the engagement with the client at the end of the day. So what happens is right in the beginning, when you are having a discussion with the client, you usually agree on certain parameters, certain aspects that you would focus on, and come up with good questions that the client wants to address by having a regular discussion with the client or deep discussions with the client, and just try to understand whether it's a strategy related problem or something else, because this is important for you to narrow down on how exactly to provide the best possible answer to the client's question. I work specifically in biopharma industry, so most of the clients are in either biotech or in the pharma companies, and the range of clients we essentially serve are from startups which are currently in stealth mode to large biotech companies, and also the entire range of the pharma companies from small pharma to big pharmas. So we do have variety of question that comes in, and this is what actually makes it really exciting, because as Dolan said, it's the closure. So you're done with the project in maybe 2 weeks, in 2 months, 3 months, but you definitely have an end to the project. So, so essentially, that's how consultants' project-wise timeline looks like. Within the day, I think it depends on the project that you are engaged in. It can be very different. It can be slightly similar. And what I mean with that is, for example, if one of the clients is essentially asking for valuation of an asset or valuation of several assets, which they would like to let's start from the beginning here. One of the examples is, for example, portfolio management. The company has enough cash and wants to diversify into different therapeutic areas, and for which they would like to acquire some of the assets, let's say in a neuroscience field. And now we discuss with them, we understand the kind of diseases they would like to look into, and then we go back and look into what are the most interesting assets that could be potentially interesting based on the client's requirement. We go and assess each of them, but we assess them on several parameters. And this is something that we can go into detail later. And you do it very methodol in a very specific manner, just to understand that you are covering all the aspects. And at the end of the day, you try to compare which one scores better, which one should be removed off the list immediately. So you gradually um, make a judgment based on your assessment, your team's assessment, and then give that recommendation to the client saying, these are the assets you should not go for. These are total no-goes. These are the assets that could be considered, but they have their own limitations. And these are the assets, for example, that we definitely recommend to look deeper. And that's when the other project could essentially start, when you start diving deeper into those. That's just one example.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that also covers part of what Shabana's question was, which was basically about what sort of questions are usually involved in the project. So, Shabana, I hope that answered those questions. We have another question from Krishna. Krishna, you're welcome to unmute yourself if you want to. Go ahead.
Hi, Mayur, just listening to, so I do modeling, and what you were talking was so much like optimization of parameters. I don't know if it sounds, so you're choosing like 3 or 4 best parameters and actually getting the best estimate. Is it like that in real time? Like, what are the 4 or 5 different things? Do you do like optimization and all, or do you guys use software, or how do you come to the best like,
So
okay, say you
essentially,
have 3.
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
actually what defines as a best molecule or a good molecule in the field is the science behind it. And therefore, understanding the
Okay.
science becomes really crucial. So what you do is essentially go and look into clinical data, you look into preclinical data, and put that in a context, because putting that in a context definitely is an essential thing. So what you're trying to do here is trying to understand if the molecule is differentiated, and that becomes really important, right? But it's not only the science that will make it a commercial success. You also need to understand if there is a need in that particular disease to bring the asset to the market. If there is enough money that the asset will generate. If the company doesn't have revenue generation to a certain level that they are expecting, it doesn't make sense to continue with the asset. So there are a lot of parameters that one looks into while reviewing those assets. Does that answer your question? So
yeah,
it's not the way that you are thinking about optimization, but there are certain ways in which we
okay.
work. And I think every company has their own way of working around.
Okay. So basically, you are what you are saying is you are looking at prior data to come to a good conclusion, so as to say, like based on what has been done in literature and some kind of intuition as well, right? It's not completely on the basis of a
Only,
published thing
yeah,
or.
only if we could look at the future data, we would recommend, we would have the best recommendations, but we cannot. So yes, you're right. We only look at the data that has been published. That's mainly in the open source, unless you have access to some data that's confidential.
So for example, like say a new drug that has come, let's take an example here. Say FDA has approved a new drug and you think that it might come good for say Alzheimer's or any kind of thing, like the new Alzheimer drug that was approved after so much of chaos. But then yeah, so so let's say you have something like that. So was it like a role of a consultant there, like to say that in a company to say push for this space and go ahead with that kind of thing?
So the job of the consultant, as I said earlier, is renting the brain, and we give recommendations. We
Okay.
Once we give the recommendation, they are justified based on certain parameters, right? It's
Okay.
eventually up to the client whether they want to take that forward or not.
Okay.
Because what,
Makes sense.
I mean, we need to understand the organizational structure, right? Not from the consulting perspective, but from the pharma industry perspective.
Okay.
They would be looking at consultants' recommendation as only one arm, but they would also have to consider a lot of other things based on which the evaluation, final evaluation would be made. So
Okay.
I think it's more complicated than just saying that we recommend and
Just
they.
okay. Okay. Makes sense. Yeah. I guess they have a lot of basically a hierarchy where you are one of the, like you give one kind of a deeper statement, so as to say, for them to make a decision.
We recommend and we have actually seen that our recommendations are often taken seriously. So
thanks. Thanks.
Mayur, I had another question. When you mention about clients, can you give one example as to say if you're talking about molecular biology or neuroscience, who are the people that you think are your clients?
The clients are mainly the pharma industry people or the biotech industry. So mostly those. And if I understand correctly, what you mean is whom we have conversations with on a daily basis, right?
Yes.
On a project-to-project basis. It
Yes.
varies. It depends. So if you're talking about big pharma companies, we rarely meet the CEOs. That's usually not going to happen. But what you end up doing is meeting a lot of people who are involved in strategy, who are involved in science management, who are involved in portfolio prioritization. But again, I'm just throwing the words here. It all depends on the project that you are focused on. In my previous experience, I've met CEOs of companies, which can be the biotech or publicly listed companies, for the work of the project itself. I have also interacted with the CSOs, but I've also interacted with the team that works with the CSO or CEO, because they understand the science well. And sometimes it's good to engage in a deeper manner with them than the CEO itself.
Thank you.
I would like to ask a question here. Is it okay? Okay. So the question is, how much of understanding finance is involved here? I understand knowing some science so that you can, evaluate assets when you are mentioning pharma company, biotech. But finance, when it comes to that, how much? And if one is preparing for this consultancy, internships or job, let's focus on jobs. Then what resources or what sort of finance resources or books one should have read?
Would you like to answer that, Dolan?
Sure. It's very basic. That's the part of the job that you will learn on the job.
Okay.
And it's very basic. You have to learn, I guess, what's a break even, what's a profit, how you calculate profit. But these are very common sense questions, like how would you come to the price of a product? It's units times whatever price per unit. They're very basic things. They're absolutely not how to put it, like not complicated finance things. At the same time, it depends on where with who your client.
You are muted, I think, by mistake.
If you are on a very finance driven project, obviously the level of finance understanding will have to go up. And then if you are on a more pre-launch type of marketing strategy type of project, that's where a basic understanding is needed. But from an interview perspective, they know you're a PhD and that is not your strength. But you will learn some aspects of it on the job, including modeling if your project demands it. But short answer is not a lot at all, like not advanced finance at all.
So the USP of a PhD candidate in such job interviews is that your ability to think, considering what is the basics and what is just needed. And then
not just to think. It's a lot of facts. It's a lot of different things. It's how to show a particular set of data so that your target audience is going to understand.
Okay.
Constantly visualizing data in your head.
Data. Okay.
Scientific data is big. How do you take a survey with 10,000 people, condense it into one graph? You can do 20 slides. How are you going to fit your story in 20 slides is up to you and your team, of course. So you are definitely thinking about how to represent data, how to visualize data, how to, of course, strategize. I mean, strategy is always a part of it, but understanding the science on a very like pre-trial project, you will also use a lot of your science background to actually understand that, this signaling pathway is a little, we are assuming a lot of factors. So maybe it's not as great as the other trial data, which is, more like direct, this is gonna work, this is gonna bring back whatever profits or, success in trials. So it depends on the type of project, what you're doing more, but sort of the data analysis part and explaining the data part is common to all projects.
Yeah, for me, I agree with Dolan. I mean, just to put that simply, I think it's all about putting things in context for the next person or the client. If you can do that. But then what's most interesting is you have to put things in context in the least amount of time. So there's a lot of time pressure. This is something that's true for any consulting firm that you talk about, any consultant that you talk with. There's a lot of time pressure there. So we usually get relaxed in academia when it comes to certain projects. That's how it operates. But when we try to put things in context, especially in consulting, it has to be done in a very defined time frame. Because the analysts, the associates, the managers, whoever you talk to, they are paid on a daily basis for the project. They are staffed accordingly.
Yeah, and just to like sort of interject on that, you are not like the ideal work stream is what? You work, you get data, then you analyze, then you put it on a slide, let's say. In the real or in the consulting world, everything happens parallelly. You are making a slide template or a structure when you don't have the data. So you are simulating a lot of, like, there's a lot of things going on in your head. And then once you get the data, you just have to see if it fits in your structure or start again from scratch. So you are sort of making a slide template, let's say, which can encompass a lot of different types of data. And hence the time problem. Everything was due yesterday because everything happened in parallel and it was not the ideal way to do things.
It's something like working for your publication before starting the project, or maybe during the midway of your project, you can say, this is what I want to have in figure 1, this is what I want to have in figure 2, and so on and so forth. And I have these data that go in figure 1 to n, and these are the data that I need to generate. So
yeah,
just to put that in context. Sorry?
It's a great analogy. That's
what I did with the postdoc. I was like, this paper is going out. These are the figures. What are the experiments though?
That's great. Do we have any other questions from the attendees? No. So I will hop onto this question you talked about, you mentioned you can ask your analyst or manager. So how many people are there in your team and how much interaction are you doing on a constant basis, like daily, for this project? Because again, Dolan said everything was due yesterday and you're constantly working on multiple things simultaneously, but how much of that also involves interaction with your team members? Dolan, if you want to go first.
Sure. So how many people are there on a project depends on the company. Some management styles are so that you give as much, as many people as you can on a particular project. Sometimes a company grows not in proportion to how many employees they have. And sometimes, you are 3 people on maybe what should have been a 5 people project. So it sort of varies. you are in constant touch because you don't get 2 days to do anything. You get a day to do things or half a day to do things. So when I started, I have this thing, and it was encouraged that you tell your manager your update every single day at the end of the day. This is what I did. This is what I'm doing. This is what I will do. That's a good thing to check for your sanity. And it's a good way to tell them, this is where I am at, because your manager or whoever, like whatever you call them in X company X, different people have different roles. Associate consultants and consultants, at least in my company, are the content makers. So we get the data. And so primary or secondary research, whatever we are doing, it needs to be, the data form needs to be analyzed and given. Then you make the slides, but everything, the manager is sort of streamlining the project workflow. And if he is or she is not aware of where what is, then it's a big disconnect above him, if that makes sense. Because the manager, again, the project workflow person is not really the main point of contact with the clients. So everybody has a higher up. So you are making things easy for the person above you. If you do a bad job, their job is double because they will need to do your job and their job. So I don't think that can be a good thing. And then, so ultimately things need to be delivered to the client. And you are just, helping your team to sort of get there. And being proactive is like a huge, huge bonus. For example, yesterday I had a small enough analysis to do, and I was like, I'm done. You guys need help with anything else? I personally think it's a very good thing that I did. Everybody does that. I learned from my colleagues. So it's not just, oh, I did my work, I am done. It's everyone has one goal, is the deliverable. Until that deliverable is finished, everybody's job is unfinished. So you are all striving towards the same goal. That is, I think, what works in the team culture, because everybody's goal is the same.
That's a great point. You say in kind of an academia, you work as a team, but like that generally doesn't happen. And I don't think you know what that means unless you're actually working in a team where the goal is common. So, Mayur, how's the structure in your company, and how do you guys go about?
It's actually very similar to what Dolon described. It's the job of the manager to make sure that all the deliverables are given to the client on time. And it's the job of the manager to make sure that everyone within the team is working as efficiently as they can. As Dolon said, it's also the job of the consultant, essentially, to make sure that they are doing the work as required for a given project. But what's also important is, essentially, if you're not able to do something, or if you're stuck somewhere, always a good idea to reach out to someone in the team or to the manager itself, just to clarify the doubt as soon as possible, because sooner the better. If you're going towards the end, it's a lot of work that puts a lot of pressure on the team unnecessarily, which could have been avoided, right? And concerning the interaction within the team, based on the project that we are associated with, we have very regular interaction. Essentially, although it's a COVID time, we are working from home in most of the cases. I end up meeting with my team members almost once a day. I always have a meeting with my manager at least once a day. But with the other team members could happen once a day, twice a day, depending on if there are any questions or doubts we would like to clarify. And concerning number of team members, I think it eventually depends on how much money the client wants to spend. Because if they have a huge budget, of course, the company will be eager to go for that project and have more consultant working on that. But usual team size is maybe 2 people to up to 6 or 7 people, depending on the project. It could be higher, it could be lower.
All right, great. So just moving slightly away from the day-to-day life, we talked about different companies. So could you guys just talk about these, at least, and I may be unaware over here, but how we have these two different groups of consulting firms, right? We have the boutique three. Okay, there you go. So Dolon, do you want to just talk about those three, like what are the three different categories, and just from your knowledge, because I feel like you know a lot about all of these things anyway, like what is different, and why did you go for a boutique consulting firm?
So the three companies that are there, they're the big threes: MBB's, McKinsey, BCG, Bain.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think if you know me for even a couple of days, you know I love BCG. I don't work for them. I think they are very nice people. I absolutely like them. I really, really like them. I had a lot of fun during my interviews and a lot of great feedback with BCG. Then there are the mid-size consulting firms that used to be a boutique firm at some point, but they are now becoming, a giant, so to speak. They are also usually working in a particular niche. And then there are the boutique firms, something like where I work in. Why I chose a boutique firm versus the big ones is because the nature of projects I wanted to be connected with. I found that in boutique firms rather than the big firms. I'll give you an example because I hate vague answers anyway. Let's say a big, like McKinsey, a good project for McKinsey would be what's happening in Europe in gene therapy. This is a great question, like that McKinsey would solve. It's not, you understand how vague this question is. So that's the type of thing that a big firm would do. A small firm would, let's say, they would do, we have a therapy, we have to commercialize it. What's the best strategy to do it? It's more science driven, it's more strategy driven. That aligned with my long-term career goals. And I thought, because I had no business experience, I thought that would be a good first step to sort of, wet my feet and know about how strategy happens on the other side of the table. And it's not this is my problem and this is the answer. It's a conversation with your client. You're also meeting with your client like almost every week, sometimes two, depending on how before or after they are from launch or from FDA approval. But that's why I chose boutique because it aligned with my goals. And the way to find out who does what work is to ask ex-employees from big firms and small firms. And also to ask big pharma and small pharma, who do you go to with your projects? That answers a lot. So my friends at Pfizer confirmed what they go to at a boutique firm with and what they go to at a big firm with. So have a two-pronged approach to make sure you're getting the right answers. That's how I know these were how the projects were divided, and the boutique ones just it just reached out to me. Plus I think the best way to sort of go into corporate, but have like a startup culture. Corporate is very, very structured. I'm not used to being very, very structured. Like I cannot do time card every day. I can't. It's a big change for me. Like I can work, but like these bureaucratic little things, they're a little foreign to me. So I wanted to be in a company that would allow me to do it once a week rather than every single day. Obviously, the smaller the less number of people, the less bureaucracy there is. It's just one of those truths. So that's why. But big shout out to BCG because they're very nice people, and no negative. Like I didn't join them because like there was any negative thing. It was just it didn't work. It didn't align with my goals. But lovely people.
That's a great point. But also that's a great point about asking people in pharma to know what kind of consulting companies they go to for their
one of the first people who helped me with my everything, like when I was just done my PhD and I knew that industry research was not what I wanted to do, was a very, for the lack of a better word, aggressive friend. And he was like, ask all the questions that you want. There is no, like, never be embarrassed of your question. It's never, if someone on the other side doesn't like your question, they'll say, I'm uncomfortable answering it. And it's an acceptable answer. So just ask whatever questions you have. So I asked whatever questions I had. And funnily enough, no one had a problem in answering them.
Great. Mayur, yours is also a boutique firm, right?
Yeah.
So again, what was your thought process when you decided to go? Was it very similar to what Dolan mentioned, or did you have something else in mind when you were looking into companies that you wanted to
No, it's
interview?
actually very similar to Dolon. I mean, during my postdoc, when I decided I wanted to move into VC or a consulting firm, the idea was to stick around in the biopharma business and not venture out too much. And this is why I thought if I move to bigger firms, I would have an issue of me being put on project or staffed on a project, which is not necessarily in bio industry. It could be, let's say, energy, it could be wind, it could be oil, it could be building planes for that matter. This is something I can do. It's not that I will not be able to do it, but I was more interested in continuing with having roots established in the biology. That was one of the main reasons why I decided to move in. And I think this is a very good point that Dolon also raised. You should ask yourself what you really align with, because it'll help you understand whether you want to focus on the big firms or the boutique firms, because the strategy on how you approach those two firms can be slightly different.
I have a question here. How does a path of a consultant who has gone from the specialist route, so boutique jobs, boutique consultancy jobs, and a generalist route, how do they differ as the time passes by? Do they keep diverging, or at some point they ultimately converge?
I've seen people from both the ends ending up in CEO roles. So I think it all depends on how you evolve within the consulting period and what kind of things excite you at the end of the day. And then you try to develop into that. And actually, it's a very valid question. Consulting gives you an opportunity to move into a lot of different industries. And I think this is one of the favorite parts I like about consulting, because now it opens doors to a lot of different things that I could move into.
Thanks.
Mayur, could you expand on that slightly? Like, what are the different options that what next? What comes next? So you join as an associate consultant.
I can give you a couple of examples that I've seen across the people I have known working, let's say, in boutique firms. Or let's start with the bigger firms. And this is from the people that I already know. This guy was working at McKinsey, and then he left the company after, I think, 3 or 4 years, and became a junior partner at one of the firms here in Europe itself. After which he decided to move and join one of the big medtech companies, focusing on the strategy part. Another example that I can dwell upon from the boutique consulting firms is a person who was manager, and then she ended up becoming COO of one of the VC firms, which is based here in Europe. Another one who ended up becoming CEO of a startup, again in Europe. So there are n number of routes that you can essentially take. It's mostly, it's not going to come back to research. If you want to come back as a scientist, if you really like it, you can of course come back, but it's going to move more towards the management side, strategy and management areas.
Okay, great. So I'm going to take another step backwards in this and talk about the interview process of consulting and how does one, so two things. The first thing is, how do you make yourself be a strong applicant on paper, right? One is that. And then second one is you get the interview call. How do you best prepare for an interview? And since this is Dolan's favorite topic, we will let her talk about it. Go for it.
So the interview process for big and boutique firms are very different. Consulting is very boring in the sense there is a resume template that you got to follow. There is a cover letter sort of structure that you got to follow. You can't show your creativity in that resume process. To get seen till that process, you have to sort of follow this one structure. It's a great structure. I feel, again, now that I'm on the other side, I can see how people hate 2-page resumes or even 1.5 page. No one got the time to read all the publications that you have. It really does not matter. So truly a big chunk is the resume. You've got to have a good resume, and a resume is not about, sort of showcasing all your academic backgrounds, because you're not pitching for an academic job. It is to pitch all these skills that you've got from academic jobs that you had so far. So all these transferable skills like data analysis and getting things done in a certain amount of time. Consultants love numbers, so you got to give them a lot of quantifiable results. Do not speak in vague terms like I wrote for a good journal. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, tell me whatever that journal means. What is good? What is in that field? What is good? Like, if there is a gradation, something like that. So resume is a huge factor in whether you get an interview. If a company wants a cover letter, I think is one of those gray zones that, people have a love and hate relationship with it. I love a good cover letter. I have been told some people start with a cover letter, and if they find you interesting on the cover letter, they move on to the resume, not the other way around. And cover letter is supposed to add to your resume, not be redundant on the resume. I mean, if you told me you have a postdoc, don't tell me again. So again, because your resume is just a page, chances are you couldn't showcase everything that you have to offer. So put those things in the cover letter. Say how wonderful you are as a teammate, how wonderful you are in getting like conflict resolution. Say those things in the cover letter. So those are the two key things. And once you do that, there'll be one very generic screen call with your HR, very basic questions about, why consultant, blah, blah, blah. It's just one of those very generic. I don't think it's really different for consulting companies per se. And then you may or may not get the first interview, or technically the second interview, in which you do a case on the phone. I absolutely do not like it. There's a lot of technical components which may go wrong and which may influence your interview. But so that's a thing. So it's always 2 cases on the phone and followed by like 2 behavioral questions. And again, the interview can be broadly divided into half behavioral, half case. And I guess I'll let Mayur talk about how cases are when he's talking about, but then the on-site interview, which has now become the full day Zoom interview, is more like you meet a series of people throughout the company on every level, and then they ask you, let's say for 15 minutes, they ask you behavioral questions and you do a case. It can be 4 cases, it can be 1 big case, it can be 2 cases, but for smaller companies or even mid-sized consulting companies, there's almost 199%, there is a presentation component in which you make a slide, you present your case, and that's when they sort of judge how, good of or where your level is in terms of slide making, data presentation, talking, navigating a whole like meeting while you're presenting, sort of those things. There's only one, I have one mantra sort of in interviews: be interesting, make them like you and be interesting. And that can be whatever your poison is to show that you're interesting is up to you. If you're not an interesting person, make yourself an interesting person, I guess. I mean, someone is giving up work to talk to you, make their time worthwhile. It's fine not to do well on a case. It's not fine to, maybe be a jerk. Don't be arrogant. Don't talk about science like, oh, you don't understand what I do. Definitely, like complete no-nos. There'll be a lot of people with just a bachelor's degree interviewing you. And I have heard horror stories that PhDs and postdocs think of themselves. Some of us have that infamous God complex. And you really don't want to talk about your work as the best next thing, and you rub people off the wrong way. There are smart people everywhere. PhD is not a metric for being smart, right? So you have to connect to them. You have to show that you're interesting one, and you're very eager to learn. I mean, you are eager to learn. I'm pretty sure you're here on a Saturday morning learning about consulting. So all of us are, I'm sure, on the same page. But be interesting, show you're a nice person. You are going to, like Mayur was saying, you will meet your team sometimes 2 times a day. You gotta like your teammates. So they're not gonna take you if they don't like you. It's as hard a truth as it is. And a great question during the interview that I ask, and I've been told it's a somewhat invasive question, is, are your colleagues or are your colleagues your friends? I think that gives a great insight into what the company culture is. It means a lot to me that I can tell my colleague, I have a doctor's appointment and I need to be there. And my colleague is not going to say, that's not my problem. The deadline is now. So these may have a lot of value to me. It may not to you. But these are sort of just, and again, the interview is also you interviewing them. So don't forget that. You are a accomplished individual, good for a job. So you are as much interviewing the company as they are interviewing you. And if anything, they will give you a lot more respect if you show that you are also interviewing. You are interviewing. You will get, let's hope, multiple offers, and then you will do a choice between this company or that company. So it's a long, tedious process, but it's mostly just common sense. Be likable. Don't be arrogant. Don't be a jerk. Talk about science. If someone asks, so I don't know what, let's say, staph is, you can't roll your eyes and be like, you don't know what staph is. Like, so what? No, your project is your world, not everybody's. So these are some of the common things that I've heard PhDs and postdocs go wrong at. But it's not the case. Consultants come from everywhere, not just PhDs and postdocs.
Great
I think
points.
I'll just add a couple of points here. One of the things that during my postdoc, when I said I would start applying for job, I kept in my mind that I will not call it interview, but rather call it discussion. As Dolon rightly pointed out, it's a discussion between two parties, whether you can work together in future. And this is something you have to keep in mind. Now, how does that actually help? When you say interview, your brain process, sorry, I'm a neuroscientist with my background. Your brain processes the information of fear, of anxiety. When you have discussion, those terms or those pathways are not as heavily excited, essentially. So what becomes is you become much more relaxed when you say discussion as compared to interview. So one of the strategy I would actually recommend calling it discussion rather than just interview. Of course, it formally you would have to call it interview because that's how it's done in the business. Now coming to the interviews, or rather the discussions themselves, how it operates, I think Dolon gave a very good gist on some of the very key points that one needs to focus on. But think of it this way, you're going into consulting, you're moving into strategy. So what kind of strategy could you apply for your application to be called for the interview? This is already a case study for yourself, right? So start thinking as a consultant right from the time of deciding, okay, I want to move into consulting, and this is what my strategy on paper is going to look like. These are the milestones that I would like to achieve in this particular time frame, and see if that works or not. You can go back and, of course, change the strategy based on a lot of factors that influence that during the process. Second thing, what you need to keep in mind is understand how well you are differentiated. This is what we essentially do when we try to recommend something to the client. We tell them if that product that they're going to acquire is differentiated or not. And what I mean with that is essentially, let's say you are one of the applicants who is applying for the consulting job. You might have a very good academic publication record, but you might not have good enough transferable skills. And the other person who doesn't even have a publication could showcase really good transferable skills that are required for the job. So of course, the job most likely will go to the other person. In that sense, he or she is more differentiated, right? So I think just try to understand, looking at your CV from the employer's perspective, on what are the things that you can focus on rather than putting everything on your CV, which makes you as a distinct candidate, which makes you an interesting candidate. I think if you cross this particular path, the interview is next, which I think Dolan summarized quite well on how the process is. One thing I would like to just mention here very quickly is I think every company would have a different way of having interviews. For example, some company divides the interview time equally between case study and fit questions. Some companies have only one case study session, some have two, some have even more. So remember, the company that you're applying to, try to get as much information about how the interview process is going to be as soon as possible so that you can start preparing for that. For example, in my company, when I applied, I did talk to a lot of people. I happen to know almost, and this is just because of networking through various means, I happen to know almost 30% of the people working in the company. So about nine people of 30 something people. So, and we got connected through different channels. And what I also want to emphasize is, if you can network with the people, they can give you some really good information. And this is what I got right before my interview. The interview was pretty simple. It was, the format has changed now, but for my company specifically, and doesn't necessarily apply to other consulting firms, so you need to do a background check on that, was 4 rounds, half an hour session each with the partners or the managers, whoever was available, and a 10-minute presentation with 5-minute question answers, so that they can assess you through various means. Case studies, our company doesn't have a very peculiar way of going into case studies. That's how they work. They just want to see if you are a likable person, if you can work in a team. And I don't know if you have heard of the airport test, which essentially means if you are, let's say me and Dolan, we are going for a consulting job to a client site. We are taking the same flight. Can we handle each other at the airport during the waiting time? So this essentially becomes a very relevant point when coming to whether you like the person or not, because if you don't like them, you would probably never talk with them, even while waiting at the airport when you don't possibly have anything else to do, right? I think this mainly covers more or less all the points. For my company, that's what I was saying. We don't have specific case studies or case interviews. They were mostly aligned towards, if this person is interesting, if the person would work well with the teams within the company, with the people within the company, and if he or she would be able to deliver. So these are most of the questions that our company focuses on, but doesn't necessarily mean others' company do not have other questions. So do a background check of the company that you're applying to. That's what you would anyways do as a consultant once you get in. So.
Okay. Since we are almost close to we are at our 1 hour mark, I'm going to ask if anybody from the attendees have any last question. We can take 1 or 2 questions. Okay, Divya asked something. If you aren't sure about consulting now, during your PhD or postdoc, can people spend time in R&D and then later on go into consulting? Does it have more challenges?
I think this would be the more traditional, not consulting per se, but consulting again is a very big word, right? If you want to move into the strategy space at some point, I think that was the more traditional route. You were a scientist 1, scientist 2, whatever, manager, blah, 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 and then finally marketing. I think that would be the more traditional route, but I don't know if there are more challenges. I don't have any data to back up this answer. So I don't know if, like, challenges wise, I don't know if there are more challenges, but you can definitely go from, when you work at a company driven by, profits, you will think not in terms of finding the greater truth, but finding in terms of how much money and how much tangible things is this product going to make. It's not going to be a project anymore. It will become a product/asset. So if you worked at an R&D, I'm pretty sure you're going to gain a lot of skills that are relevant to becoming a strategy person. And you will be in on all of these calls with medical team, sales team, strategy team, business team. So you will learn a lot even in that setting, I'm pretty sure.
I actually agree with Dolan. I have seen one person actually joining our company after she worked in a pharma company as a team lead for a few years. She then transitioned into our company. So I don't see that as a major challenge. The question is, are you willing to move in a direction more towards strategy, or are you planning to rise up in the corporate level, which is only focused on the research that you're involved in, which is preclinical or clinical?
I have a question. How much percentage of consultancy firms hire throughout the year instead of that being a job cycle? The most of the companies I saw, they were hiring, applications were closed by August, September. So this is more of a general question. And then Mayur, for you, I have a specific question about the job cycles in Europe. I know Europe is too vague of a term, so probably the country right now you are working in.
So at least for the Europe, I can tell you that I think for the big firms, when we are talking about big firms, they usually have 2 cycles a year. This is how they tend to operate. And correct me, Dolan, if I'm wrong on this one. For the boutique firms, I think it all depends on the business. If they have a good business running, if they need more people, they will hire independent of the cycle. At least that's what I have seen here in Europe.
Okay.
Yeah, people always want good people to be added. If they have a need, they'll add. And it's probably not the right thing to say. A silver lining of COVID was, a sort of explosion in this space. So small companies are becoming mid companies, mid are becoming large. So people are, I think the hiring thing has shot up the roof, very frankly.
One of the questions that Rinki had regarding the big 3 team changes from project to project, this is actually true for any consulting firm. This will change because not all people will be staffed on the consecutive projects all the time. Just because the projects are spatially separated, and then you could be staffed on any project within the company.
If there are no other,
I said it's a good thing.
Okay.
To keep your team, because what if you can get along with one team member? You just have to deal with them for a month and then you're done. But then again, the downside is if you really like working with that team and it changes.
Yeah, I have one last question. So the question is, one of the informational interview I held with one of the consultants, I appreciate his honesty. He said that in the starting, you will have to work to your death, but you will get paid well. And sort of after being underpaid throughout my academic, like PhD and all, now I have to ask you, how much, is average paid, and is it too low? I really don't see myself working for long years with pure money. I think that's one thing that I have to be very direct and honest about what I'm looking for in my next job.
It's not a bad question at all. When I started my job search, I was very sure I would just take the offer from the company who paid me most. It was a horrible strategy. I now know that if I had done that, I wouldn't have been happy. I went with the people, it's a very cliched thing, but I went with the people I liked and who saw me as a person, not an ID number, not just money. That being said, the answer to your question, again, it's different for big and small companies. And it's a very, Glassdoor is not great for a lot of domains, great for consulting, at least in the US. So go on Glassdoor, you will see buckets. They're very accurate. They're actually very accurate. One of the things that really stood out to me, for a lot of the boutique firms, they don't negotiate because they pay every starting employee the exact same thing if you come with MBA, PhD versus bachelor's versus whatever, right? So there's no like inequality there. And I really love that fact. I really love that whether I can negotiate or not is not gonna affect what I should be paid for my services. And work to death is, you will work. I mean, you will work. And in the beginning, you will take more time than you will take more time than you should, because you're also learning. Yeah, you will work there, but whether it's to your death, I don't know. Like, I don't know how to how to explain this. There is a lot of work. I will say this. There is work that needs to be done. You will have to do that work. If you take more time, that's on you. If you take 1 hour more time, then you are giving 1 more hour. I didn't go into equity research because they did tell me the hours that I needed to work, and that didn't work for me. But these are very honest questions to ask in an interview, actually. No one is going to lie about it. These are absolutely fair questions to ask in an interview.
So maybe I can just put some numbers there. In terms of working hours, if you're talking about the big consulting firms, and this comes from discussion with a lot of people who have worked in those companies, the working hours can go up to 70 to 80 hours a week. And that's from Monday to Friday only, and not Saturday, Sunday. Saturday, Sunday is yours.
Okay.
So essentially, and when I say to some people that you work 14, on an average 12 to 14 hours, or maybe sometimes even more per day, sometimes I have a discussion saying that as a postdoc or as a PhD, they also sometimes work for those number of hours, so they would be used to it. But the working in consulting, or rather industry, would be slightly different from academia, because what you tend to do in academia is often, let's say, start an experiment and go for an incubation, have it on incubation, go for a cup of coffee, and then come back, process the experiment further, have it on incubation, and then you can walk around freely, or catch up with a friend, or whatever the case is. So it's not work per se throughout, which is not the case in consulting. In consulting, when you are sitting there, you are actually sitting there working. Of course, you get breaks. You do eat lunch. You won't survive without that. You do get coffee breaks. You go and bring your coffee, but it all depends on you, how smartly you work, how effectively you work, and if you can deliver on time, because this is what is required at the end of the day. Concerning the numbers in terms of salaries, I think it varies between US and Europe. I think everyone here is from US, right?
I am though interested to hear about Europe, if you could mention it in short.
Yeah, so salaries in US, I think, would be in the, I suppose, around 100,000.
Yeah, I put it in the chat. Ranges from 100K to 150K.
Yeah, so essentially, I know BCG, at least for the BCG or McKinsey, one of those companies, I always tend to confuse between them. Sorry, Roland. They pay around 125, 130K for an incoming consultant right after your PhD or postdoc. So that's the range you're talking about. In boutique firm, it could be slightly different, or maybe slightly lower. but this is something that's the usual range we are talking about. In Europe, it's much cheaper. The salaries are lower just because Europe is cheaper in general than let's say New York or Boston or any of the big cities in California we are talking about. So the cost of living is lower. So you can anticipate anything starting at the postdoc salary and going upwards from there. And postdoc salary here can be in the range of 50 to 60K, 50 to 60,000 euros.
Euros.
Yeah. So that's roughly what, 60,000 euros would be roughly $70,000.
Mhm.
But you see a steep increase in salaries, and that's a good thing, depending on how you perform.
Yeah, the jumps are significant, I feel like. And the jumps are, it differs from company to company. It may not be, some companies follow a 2-year rule, up or out sort of a system. And some companies are more meritocratic, so that if they think you're ready to become the next level, they give you the promotion, and the time differences may not be maybe you are much better at delegating than actually doing a slide. So chances are you'll take a much longer time to become the next level of consultant, and you will go to the managerial level at a much faster rate, if that makes sense. So the jumps make a lot of difference.
Also, just to add a small point to that, I mean, two things that are really important to, if you're considering consulting. One of them is the number of hours that you'll be putting in. The work-life balance is definitely disturbed, and at least to a certain extent. And it also depends on how smart you are in finishing up your project. So this is something that will happen at least in the beginning, and then you get used to it. And then depending on how you perform at the end of the day. The second is willingness to travel. In COVID, it's not happening at the moment, but once things get back to normal, whenever that happens, in the bigger firms, I know people travel from Monday to Thursday, and then on Friday they are back to their office, or come back on Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday is off. Monday they leave again for the client side. So it's roughly 80% of travel time for the big firms. For the smaller boutique firms, it all depends on the project. It can be as low as 10%, it can be as high as 50, 60%. So if you don't like to travel too much, maybe consulting is not the best thing to move forward with. If you don't want to spend 12 hours working a day, at least in the beginning, maybe not a good thing to move into. Or rather, let me just rephrase that. If you're really focused on work-life balance, maybe consulting is not the best thing to enter. Very harsh realities, but this is something that's true across the companies.
Mhm.
Uh,
There is a great question that Tracy has asked in the chat.
Yeah.
Do you think those 80% will ease because of the teleforcing success, or it will go back to before?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I think people still like that FaceTime with clients. You can get a lot done, when you can just be there. But that being said, my personal opinion is that I think it may go back to a hybrid. Because big consulting firms spend a lot of money on travel and lodging. If they can save that, it's all about saving money. It's a business. Like that's always the case. So I think if they can do that, they might see certain cases in which traveling may not be crucial. But if you are doing that, if you're sitting down with the EC to finally streamline what you're going to do, that final meeting really needs to be in person, frankly. I mean, teleconferencing is convenient and great and saved the world during COVID, but in person has its, these moments that you just can't replace. But that is completely my opinion. I have no idea.
I actually agree with Dolan. I mean, we don't know how the future is going to look like, but just based on how the business activities have been ongoing, people have been comfortable using online platforms for discussions and for meetings. Having said that, they also feel that business development is not that optimal because that interaction with the client is not happening. So I think it's going to be a hybrid model, as mentioned earlier. Whether it's 50-50, 30-70, or 70-30, this is something I don't think anyone can put a specific number. But if you can save some money, why not? And there was also a question from Krishna.
I think Dolon answered
Okay.
that.
I mean, it's a loaded question, really. We can talk offline, Krishna, if you want. It's very complicated, that client, and it completely depends on how you set the relationship. Some clients really want your input, and that's that. And some clients will keep you updated on how things are changing at their end. So it's really a discussion and how your relationship is with that. So yeah,
Sure.
sometimes.
Sure, I will get back to you. Yeah.
In case, Pooja, you mentioned you are interested in applying, or you are also open for Europe.
Yeah.
There are a couple of things that you could possibly keep in mind while especially applying for boutique firms regarding the CV, because unlike US, you need to have a professional photograph on your CV.
Okay.
That becomes mandatory for a lot of countries within the European Union. I don't know
Okay.
how it operates in UK. Probably you don't need it there, but if you're applying for Germany, France, Netherlands, Switzerland, etc., you need to have a professional photograph on your CV.
Okay.
I have seen people submitting up to 2 pages of your CV, and that should be okay. If you can keep it in 1 page, that's even better.
Okay.
And the numbers, it's not about essentially what positions you have held, what kind of research you have done, but what has been the outcome. Think of that while creating your CV, for anyone for that matter.
Yeah.
The outcomes matter. The numbers matter.
Yeah, just write a line and see, does anybody else, will they care? Does this have any relevance to them? It's like real estate. If you're gonna use something, it better be worth it. If you're gonna put a word, it better be worth it. And even partners at high levels, they have 1-page resume. So if you can't fit, it means you are unable to express it in a particular way. Sit with someone, get feedback from everybody, like on every level. There is no amount. If I saw my resume today, I'd be like, I don't know why I did that. Maybe let's change. It's like a writing in progress thing. You are never really happy, but you have to put something forward.
I mean, at the end of the day, think of resume as 30, 35, or 25 years. I don't know what age range we are talking about here. It's 25, 35 years of experience that you have to put on 1 page. So you need to be really critical on what information you're going to put in.
I think that wraps up all the questions.
A lot of information, I suppose.
Yes, all good information, all very direct and honest opinions, which I really like. But thank you so much, Dolon and Mayur, for joining us on a Saturday afternoon, evening, and talking to everybody. And thank you to everybody who attended. We will obviously share a recording of this one with you all. And thank you once again. Hope you have a good rest of the weekend.
Also, just to that, I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn in case we are not connected. And if you have any specific questions, just reach out and then we can take it from there.
+1 on that.
Thank you.
All right, I am going to stop the recording.